1930s, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt addressed the nation through a series of radio broadcasts known as the Fireside Chats. His aim was to reassure the common man that our society would recover from its troubled times. Well, we're far from 1930, and I deal with a different kind of fire. For a new era of worldly frustration, we offer a fresh conversation. I'm Greg Carlwood, and these are the Higherside Chats.
Well, folks, I hope you're strapped in because it's going to be another wild ride. From sunny San Diego, I'm Greg Carlwood, and I'm sure most of us have been around long enough to realize there are a lot of forces in the world we can't control, some we can't identify, and even a few we can't seem to simply detect. Add in the fact that society has bred us to be little more than cogs in the big machine, content to spend the 8 hours a day on mundane tasks if it means a little green paper and some entertaining screens to sit behind for the other 16. And it's safe to say that we've lost our self-sufficiency and with it our ability to navigate or even just survive in the natural world. And that's when it's acting normal. Well, when one of us does break off from the herd here in the great American terrarium, the worst place they can end up is as one of the many mysterious cases of missing people lost to the wilderness covered in one of the books or films of today's returning guest, David Paulides. We had David here to talk about his Missing 411 work back in 2014 when it was really just getting started. And now the cases he's chronicled are totaling over 1,200, spanning 59 clusters, 8 massive books, and now 2 films as well. For the uninitiated, David is an avid outdoorsman who has spent over 20 years in law enforcement and senior executive positions in the technology sector, and he's also the director of the Can-Am Missing Project. Many moons ago, David received information from national park rangers that led him to dig deeper into missing people in national parks, only to find out that many people seem to disappear under very strange circumstances that often hit many of the odd profile points he's gathered over the years of research. Add in the fact that the national park system doesn't seem to keep a list of missing people, at least that they're willing to share or talk about. They're very uncooperative with David's research, and they act damn near adversarial in a lot of instances, and this only fuels the mystery. Yes, in fact, I think it's safe to say that at this point, David's Missing 411 work has become so popular, it's basically created its own subgenre of paranormal conversations, and the speculative search for answers has run the gamut from Bigfoot kidnappings and alien abductions to Native American curses, secret government projects, and portal places. Today we're going to talk about some of the cases covered in the new film Missing 411 The Hunted, as well as some from his latest book Missing 411 Law, Land, Air, and Water. And if we do our job right, you'll be as puzzled as you are paranoid. So without further ado, the great disappearance detective and the father of Missing 411, David, my man, welcome back to the Higherside.
Hey, Greg, thanks for having me. It's always fun to talk to you.
Thanks, man. Yes, this is a real treat. I'm sure every host in the game is thrilled when they get to have you on because this work is so unique. You're a disciplined researcher and the case studies are amazing. Of course, your work started in national parks mainly in North America, but also across most of the English-speaking world, and has since expanded a bit to include other wilderness areas with about 59 or 60 identified clusters now. Maybe to get started here, you can elaborate for us about how the work has changed or expanded since our first conversation 5 years ago. Is Yosemite National Park still the largest cluster of missing people anywhere in the world?
You know, Greg, it is. When we first started out, got a tip from 2 national park rangers that they had experienced a series of missing people in their various parks that they'd worked at, and there was something unusual about it because they couldn't find documents that they were looking for afterwards, and they said that there was a lot of hype and a lot of support for the first 7 to 10 days, and then after the search was over, there was nothing. And they thought that where these people were missing was unusual. Not all of the missing go away deep in the backcountry. Sometimes it's a public area or a semi-public area in the heart of the park, and it doesn't make any sense. So with that, we started off and we focused mainly on national parks, and we filed a series of Freedom of Information Act requests against the National Park Service. They stated that they didn't have any lists of missing people, and we went through their National Park Police Department, which are highly trained men and women that are very good at their job, but for some reason they didn't want to admit that they had any lists. And talking to many investigative journalists, they said they're lying. They've got a list. They've got to have a list. Your listeners could go into any medium and small police department in the U.S. and ask the chief of police for a list of missing people in their jurisdiction, and that chief would have a list on his desk in an hour. And after that, we went through and started to look at national parks really, really closely because we wanted to understand why they weren't giving up the list. And we just did a deep dive into archives. And after almost 9 years now of research, Yosemite finally came out with a list of missing people only after I had written about all of them or addressed them in interviews. So that was not a mystery, but no other national park or monument has. So I routinely get asked how many people are missing in national parks and monuments, and I have no idea. It'd be a complete guess. And in my line of work, once you guess and are proved wrong, your credibility is lost. So I don't guess on a lot of things. I try to keep my comments strictly factual. And that's how we slowly evolved from national parks to national forests, Bureau of Land Management, federally owned land, and even some private land now.
Mm.
And after you look at hundreds of cases, certain things start to become apparent. But then after you look at thousands of cases, things start to pop out at you. And when I was a police officer, I worked a few task forces where we were looking at robbery suspects and rapists, and we'd have a big bulletin board on the office wall, and we would put pins in the wall where these people hit. And we tried to map out where they would go next. And I took that and I put it into this research, and I said, I remember a lot of people being missing from Yosemite. And I said, and there were a lot of people missing from Rainier. And I said, I'm going to get a big U.S. map and start putting pins in it just like I did it as I was a cop. And eventually, after several years, these geographical clusters of missing people started to become apparent. Now, not everybody who goes missing in the wild I'm interested in. I'm sorry for them, but I'm not interested. We go through a vetting process. That vetting process includes there's no mental health issues with the victim, there's no suicide, etc. There's no evidence of criminal involvement, meaning there's no crime. Also, there's no evidence that the person, say, was assisted in some way in disappearing. Other things that we vet out are predation cases, meaning persons killed by a mountain lion, black bear, brown bear, etc. Any evidence of any of that found by search and rescue, we won't look at it. And after looking at thousands of cases, there's certain what we call profile points that have come out that are pretty apparent. And if the case doesn't match those profile points, then we won't look at it. So the profile points I've kind of outlined in the book, the most popular ones are they bring canines to the scene. Canines can't pick up a track or they can't find a scent. Sometimes they walk in a circle and lay down. They bring in professional trackers. They can't find tracks leaving the scene. And there's a weather event sometimes with the disappearance. Sometimes just as the person is disappearing or just as search and rescue starts to work the case, they have a weather event of snow, rain, wind, something that inhibits the searches. And that's kind of the 10,000-foot overall profile.
Yes, those are two of the most intriguing profile points and a great introduction or reintroduction for people. And you are so respected for that discipline to stick to just the facts. You leave the crazy speculation to hosts like me, and that's what I think people like about you. And it is kind of crazy. Some of the other profile points, victims are often found in areas that were previously searched, sometimes missing clothes or shoes. When they are found alive, they have a lack of memory of where they've been. And another one that's weird is geographically, a lot of these are found near rivers, creeks, or ponds, or boulders and granite. And people might say, well, what else is out in the wild? You might as well say they go missing near trees, but that is pretty significant, right?
We think so. And the granite part of it is Yosemite, and there's the most granite you'll find anywhere in the world is there. And that was part of it. And then when you start to think, when I say in proximity to water, I'm talking about close proximity, sometimes to the point of being ridiculous. And I wrote a book called Missing 411, A Sobering Coincidence, which has to do with people that are found directly in water. And you think, well, that's a drowning case, that's pretty obvious. Well, when you read the book, it's not so obvious. And coroners and medical examiners have contacted me and said, yeah, something strange is coming on because we can't find a cause of death on most of these people, and that is not normal.
Mm. And I remember when we talked before, the great majority of cases was largely about children back then, and a lot of these children were not found alive. If they were, they couldn't really say much about what happened. I think there was one girl who mentioned that she met a strange bear creature. But in these last 5 years, when you've examined cases where people are found alive, is this loss of memory still a huge factor? Have you gotten any kind of clues to the mystery from people who have survived their own disappearances?
I learned long ago that we won't proactively, 99.9% of the time, go out and try to talk to a victim. And when you go into a new research arena, you are a fool if you don't contact people that are already there and understand where the landmines are at. So that's what I did. I went out and I talked to a couple of missing persons groups, and they said, well, the number one thing to remember is that these people are traumatized. Many of them don't want to talk about it, and many of them don't want to talk about it for years. So if you're going to go out and proactively reach out to them and then write about their story later on, they may feel re-victimized and be angry at you. So I haven't done that. And there are just a very, very few instances where I felt I had to, and I did, and it worked out okay. So I usually get my facts on the periphery from other police officers, search and rescue coordinators, reports that they've written, and I glean the facts off of those. Sometimes even the news gets some things right. But as I've stated in many books, the articles about missing people are about 50 to 75% incorrect when you look at it and you get down into it. People these days, a lot of reporters aren't making a big effort to get their facts right, unfortunately.
Yes, I understand the hesitancy to talk to the victims themselves. The research is important, but you also want to do no harm. And as I mentioned our last conversation, we focused on the odd cases that involve mainly children under about 10 years old who seem to go missing almost in the blink of an eye when their parents turn their heads for just a minute and are found oftentimes days later and miles from where they went missing. Sometimes they took off their shoes. Sometimes the body, alive or dead, showed up on a previously searched path. And the whole thing, from the distance traveled to the resistance from the park services, was very suspicious. And these child cases also seemed to be the subject matter of that first film, right?
That's correct. And a lot of people didn't understand why we did that. It's pretty easy when you get down to the bare bones. First of all, if you're not a parent, sometimes it's difficult to understand and appreciate the angles we took in this movie. And in that first one, there were a lot of kids that I had written about where they had walked a phenomenal distance in the woods. Sometimes, again, it's hard to grasp the importance of this if you don't have kids and you don't know, hey, my kid could never do that. Or my kid couldn't walk 3,000 feet up the side of a mountain at 3 or 4 years old. So the importance to that is the parents out there, when you watch the movie and you said, this isn't happening, this isn't normal. And that was the point of it.
Yes, I really, really enjoyed that first film. And to get into the second film, this newest one, Missing 411, The Hunted, and also material that's in your more recent books, you focused a bit more on hunters that go missing, which is interesting for different reasons. The kids, of course, shouldn't be able to get as far as they do, and these situations are mysterious because of their helplessness. But hunters, these cases are mysterious because of their familiarity with the woods and their resourcefulness.
Exactly. And a lot of people don't think about this, but I'll throw it out there, is that almost all of the hunters, I'd say 75% of the ones I've written about, are armed. And when you're armed with a rifle or a pistol, that's an excellent device to signal for help. And hunters are trained that when you go missing, sit down, fire off 3 rounds in fairly rapid succession. Wait an hour, fire off 3 more rounds. That'll tell you the friends that are looking for you where you're at and how they can hone in on you. So that's a device that most people hiking don't have. But it's one of the reasons I tell people when they go into the woods hiking to carry a firearm. Now, the opposite end of that are archery hunters. And they disappear at a higher incidence per capita than armed hunters, which is unusual. Now, I also tell archery men and women to carry a pistol with them when they're out there as well. But the archery people and the firearms people, many of these men and women have hunted the same areas for decades. Some of them own their own hunting camps. And yet, even though they know this area like you know your backyard, they disappear. And the weird thing is, they disappear and nothing's found. And I mean, there's no firearms found, there's nothing found. And that makes no sense because an animal isn't going to drag away a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the people that initially have that knee-jerk reaction will say their mind will go to someplace to make it right. Okay, well, maybe they fell down, broke their leg, and died. Uh-huh. Then one of the canines, sometimes dozens that are brought to the scene, should have been able to track that person right to the place they went down. Other people will say, well, you know, they got attacked by a mountain lion or a bear, and they died, and they got drug away. Well, again, once you've seen a predation scene, and you can go on to Google and Yahoo, and you can put in bear attack, mountain lion attack, and you can see what those scenes look like. They're gruesome. They're easy to find. There's clothing that's torn up. There's blood everywhere. I mean, you cannot miss it. Now, the search and rescue coordinators are all trained on how to find these things. Now, a hunter who's out there, who's a predator themselves, looking for game, they're out there because, number one, they usually know the area very well. They've practiced their sport many times in the past. Sometimes they've hunted the area hundreds of times. They're carrying a weapon, so they're a formidable opponent. Now, how can these people just disappear and never be found? And people think, well, yeah, you know, maybe that happens once in a while. But in my book, Missing 411 Hunters, it's happened hundreds of times.
Mm-hmm. Yes, great point that hunters are going to have way more supplies than children. They're going to be way more equipped. So when no trace is found, that's even stranger. And never a shot fired in the vast majority of these cases. So they definitely don't see whatever this problem is coming. They don't even fire shots off to signal they're lost. There are some cases in the film that it doesn't even seem like the person realized they were lost because of some of the strange details. As you said, they don't drop the gun or anything. This stuff around the gun, I mean, the more I sat with it, the weirder it was. What does that say to you that these missing people, hundreds of cases, don't even fire off a shot that their hunting partners in the nearby area would even hear?
So in the movie, we highlighted a case where a person was a hunter safety instructor for decades. And then he had his firearm. He was in very close proximity to other hunters. And something that most hunters do carry is a walkie-talkie to communicate with their partners. Well, the walkie-talkie is never used. The rifles are never found. They're never heard going off. So when you put that in a cumulative arena, you scratch your head and say, well, did the person want to disappear? No, based on his family life, his history, and law enforcement saying no way. So what could have happened that would have wiped out any evidence that he was even there?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple of cases where these people are in their 70s or 80s, the most experienced of the hunters, but not the most physically fit. And it's pretty clear to everyone they go hunting with, to their friends and family, they aren't moving far. Maybe this is someone that decided to stay back and hold the campsite down while everyone else goes out. They come back to the campsite and that person's missing, which is the strangest because everybody was on the same page that they're not going anywhere and they physically can't get very far. And that's just very puzzling.
And that's part of why those cases are in there, is to make you think, well, if somebody was really mobile, then maybe they could walk out of the mountains. But these people, no. Their friends knew them and said, no, that person's not going far. That's the reason we were hunting in the way we were. We sat down a group of people and we were pushing the deer towards them, and those guys wouldn't get up. They were just going to stand up and fire.
Yes. It's hard to wrap your mind around fully what could possibly happen to these people. And there is one case, I believe it's in a wilderness area of New York, that was really intriguing to me because it hits all the major mysterious bullet points, but someone who was in the party did hear something, and that is a rare insight into some possibilities, right?
The way that story goes is a series of old hunters, like they're all between, say, 70 and 80 years old, maybe a little north of 80, a couple of them. And their sons and their relatives were going to walk a mile, 2 miles out and push the deer towards them. And these guys, there were a series of them, were about 50 yards apart, sitting down, waiting for the deer to come their way. These guys have all been together for 50 years. They're best friends. They own a hunting camp. And during that time, during an interview with one of these guys, I accidentally asked him, well, did you hear anything strange out there? And he goes, yeah, I did. And I thought, wow, okay, because he looked disturbed when he said it. And I said, well, what did you hear? And he goes, I just can't explain it. I've never heard it before. I said, well, did you tell law enforcement? He goes, yeah, but they didn't really take me seriously. And I said, so you've never heard this before? Nope. And I said, so how can you describe it? And later on, he kind of said it was a clank or a clang kind of sound. It was instant, it was fast, and it was while they were sitting down waiting for the deer to get pushed towards them. And he says, in 55 years of hunting and being in the woods, I've never heard anything like it. Well, then you couple that with, in 55 years in the woods, he's never lost a hunting partner either. Now, it wasn't directly in the region that his buddy was sitting, but it was still a sound he heard in conjunction with the time he and his partner were waiting for the deer to get pushed towards them. I've never had anything like that told to me before, and you could tell that this man was really disturbed by it.
Mm-hmm. And it's just another one of those cases where it seems like law enforcement, or maybe the further up the chain you go, some of these odd clues are either dismissed or maybe they're not letting on everything they know. And I believe this is one of those cases where the FBI was involved and it really isn't their jurisdiction, if I'm not mistaken, right?
So back when I was digging through cases in 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, I started to see the FBI showing up on cases where they shouldn't really be interested. Now, the FBI has protocol that they can participate in a search of a missing child, young child. But the FBI does not search or participate in searches on missing adults. They investigate criminal activity. That's what the FBI does. Now, when they started to show up on these adult cases, all of a sudden made me start thinking, okay, they're looking at something I'm looking at, and they can't figure it out either. That's why they're showing up. Now, nobody on that New York case could figure out why the FBI was there or who called them. But two agents show up way up in the middle of the woods and just say that they're going to monitor the case. Now, as someone who's worked with the FBI before, these people are the best at documentation. And these two agents went up there and I'm sure wrote one heck of a report that went to the FBI profiling section. Those profilers look at it and they try to find similar cases, kind of like what I'm doing, that fit the mold of what they researched and what they wrote about and try to match it together. Now, when I spoke to one of the search and rescue commanders there on film, he said, the FBI's never been on a search I've been on before, and I have no idea who called them or why they were there. He thought maybe they brought some resources with them to help, but he goes, I didn't know what they were. Because I can't even tell you why they were there. Now, the other part on this that is really odd is that New York area, the upper northern New York region, has a lot of wildlife. And when we were out there filming, we thought it was odd that we didn't see any wildlife. And when I asked the search and rescue commander if while he was searching, if he had found or seen or any of his people had come across any wildlife at all, he goes, no, and that was odd. He said, we didn't see any squirrels, we didn't see any deer, we didn't see any bear, we didn't see anything. And these guys had hunted that general upper New York area many times, and this was state land they were on, yet nothing was seen. I think that's weird.
That's very weird. And it kind of jives with some paranormal experiences we've heard about from witnesses where they say it does get quiet before they encounter a cryptid or weird orbs in the sky. And it also kind of jives with that profile point that dogs can't find the scent or they won't find the scent. We can't communicate with the dogs to find out why things are going differently, but perhaps they're just like, I'm not going there. But I think that all fits. Animals are very intuitive, and I guess they know something is going on here.
They obviously have the ability to pick up a scent hundreds, sometimes thousands of times better than us. So if there was one there, either it didn't want to track for some reason or it couldn't pick it up. But in almost all of the cases, 99.8% of the cases I write about, canines cannot pick up a scent. Trackers brought in can't pick up a track. And in this case in New York, that's exactly what happened.
Wow. So as I had mentioned in the intro, there is so much speculation as to what's happening. Bigfoot, aliens, secret government projects, natural portal places on the planet. Have you gotten any closer to an answer in the last few years? Have you kind of circled around a possibility that maybe you hadn't 5 years ago?
I think all of those things you brought up are things that people have written to me about. And I hear about it all the time. I don't think that there's an easy answer, and I doubt that there's one answer. It may be a multitude of things. I did a 2-hour special on the History Channel at the beginning of this year. You can watch it on Amazon right now, called Vanished. And in that, the production company sent me to Wisconsin to interview a physicist. And we sat down and we had a great talk. And the one thing that came out of it was I told him that there were times when people were on the trail, specifically parents, and they said, yeah, my child was in front of me. I saw him the whole time. Then they kind of got out of my view for just a few seconds and they were gone. And you hear that so many times that it came to me that it was almost something appeared to be waiting for the time that the target wasn't in the eyes of the witnesses, and then all of a sudden it was gone. And this physicist said, and I asked him, I said, well, we were talking about portals specifically. I said, can portals be targeted? And he kind of smiled and he goes, Dave, you know, there's a group of physicists in the world that are studying this topic right now to see if it could be used in that manner, almost to militarize it. And he says, I can guarantee 100% there are things that might be used in different words that are portals. But he said, you know, can it be targeted? We're thinking it must be able to be, because nobody that we know about that has come forward and said, yeah, we're walking down a street in New York City and we see an opening happen in front of us and our friend walking on the sidewalk 20 feet in front of us disappear. You don't hear about that happening.
Mm-hmm.
But you do have these strange disappearances when the people are out of view. So the portal idea was an interesting one that gave it some, and this guy gave it some scientific validation.
Yeah, that is fascinating because, as we mentioned, that one guy did hear that strange noise that sounded like something mechanical, like a steel trap closing, perhaps something in that realm. Maybe that's the sound of a portal gun or something. But I was thinking about the portal places hypothesis, and it is interesting, but the government would have to have known where these were if they were natural and then developed them into national parks away from the cities on purpose. But I guess in the case of them being able to be targeted, it's possible that it's some kind of military experimentation or fine-tuning of their technology, or maybe it's not their technology.
Well, and I'll just stay in the science realm for a second. There's a couple of videos that were made by some companies that show their stealth technology. I've seen it in almost a blanket type of format where you pick up a blanket and it appears as though it's directly like the area around it. So you can't tell that something's picked up, but whatever's behind that, you can't see it. So there is some stealth technology going on right now that is phenomenally good that could, you could wrap somebody in something and take them away. The issue with that is that obviously the person would scream, there'd be drag marks, unless there's the technology that you could just remove them from the area quickly using this stealthy type thing. But again, that's something that's out there right now that somebody had brought up to me a few years ago, and I said, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, you'd really have to zap them in an instant, and it'd have to remove everything that they're touching, regardless of its material type, because otherwise they drop their gun, they drop their hat. You'd see blood if it was something really violent, but again, it's just not there.
And then probably one of the other things I get a lot of, and I'll talk about it because this came out of the first movie, is people said, well, it's pretty obvious what's happening to these kids is that they're getting picked up by a giant bird and they're getting flown away. That way there's no tracks and there's no scent. And I said, yeah, but you're forgetting something. These kids are disappearing in sometimes extremely close proximity to the parents. If a giant bird picked up a child and their talons went into that child strong enough that it could lift it off the ground, that would be a huge wound, and that kid would be screaming their heads off.
Mm-hmm.
And when the child was eventually found, those wounds would be evident in the kid. And none of those things ever happened.
And the second film is called The Hunted. I'm sure that is a catchy way to insinuate that these are all hunter cases, but also kind of implies that you think something is getting them to some degree. I mean, is that right?
Well, all of the movies and all of my books start with Missing 411, and then whatever the name is. So Missing 411, The Hunted, it was a takeoff of, the movie's about hunters, but who's really the hunted in the movie?
Right.
Is it the hunters going after the deer? Is it the hunters going after the bear or the elk? Or are they the hunted?
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that's odd about the prospect of it being a military operation or there being some kind of advanced hunter that's out there in the woods waiting to pick people off on the edges is just how much space this covers. I mean, 60 clusters. You've gone all across the English-speaking world. It's hard to say it's a government project because the coordination between all these different countries, it wouldn't really be there. And it can't be just something in Yosemite because this is happening all over the place. I guess if it was something hunting them, it would be something that has no problem getting around the planet and is just leagues above us.
Well, I think the people who are just listening for the first time probably think, well, this must be an issue for the last 50 years.